What's the hardest thing for you to comprehend about the American culture? How casual debt is. How easy it is to take loans and credit cards out in other people's names without their knowledge. My mom put my over $30,000 in debt without my knowledge before I was 21. I have a family of my own now hit a hard spot and couldn't even get a $500 loan. Only thing I've ever taken out at my name is my cell phone, which she somehow managed to get my debt in that to over $2,000. Yes, I was paying for her cell phone. Yes, I was Didn't expect my mom to use my name like she owned it. That's a complete falsification. Global identity information is cheap and widely available. It's difficult to get a loan in another person's name because of it. What people do here in America is use weird credit repair products and direct insertion of fake identity into the bureaus. Then you take out bad loans in your name or a fake person. Identity theft is usually someone you know or interact with. Well, that sounds easy to fix, you say? Yes, but I'm America. We like to create 20 industries around a problem rather than fix it. More money to be made on the whole than saved, and the only person who suffers is the consumer. I don't have a lot of complaints about living in America, but this is one of the biggest things next to healthcare. I hate that most non-salary jobs basically give you nothing. My last job gave me a week. They upped it right before I left. Pretty sweet because I got to cash out 2 weeks right before I left instead of the one I was expecting. The job before that was 1 week. But if you stayed long enough, you could get up to 5 or 6. And you didn't have to stay long. You hit max after 4 or 5 years and you got a bump every 2. So first year was 1, second and third year was 3, and once you hit 4 years you got the max. Which isn't great but not terrible. My current job is a week after a year. Not sure of any increases. Where I live, we only get 2 weeks of vacation after being full-time for 6 months, but we don't get them at the same time. We have to wait a few months between each week, which means if we want to take them at the same time, we have to wait a long time. Then there are certain blackout periods throughout the year where no one is allowed to take time off because of a specific time frame going on at the store, so we have to wait until that's over to be free to take time off again. For me, it happens around Christmas time and something called 100 Days of Summer. I am from Singapore, and we also have people like that here. We have churches that steal hundreds of millions from followers that still attract cult following, and we have churches own entire shopping mall empires and who have pastors that own yachts and private jets. South Korea is also like that, and they all have close ties to the government in ways that does not happen in the US. In the US, only about 0.5% of the population goes to a megachurch, let alone one of the kleptomanic ones. It is much, much higher here. Real reason: no child left behind. Instead of reforming the obsolete Cold War-era economic, educational system, or bringing low educational requirement manufacturing jobs back to the US from China, the government decided everyone needed a college degree, and to eat each other alive for the tiny amount of living wage jobs that might exist in the future, which never came to be. Turns out the notion of America doesn't need factories, we can export ideas doesn't exactly employ entire towns like a factory can. Who knew? So in order to grease the high school to college debt pipeline, the government brought in No Child Left Behind. Instead of reforming the system, it lowered standards, made federal funding fixed to test scores, teacher authority, embraced zero-tolerance policies, and ensured that even hungry, tired, mentally ill teens could achieve a now worthless diploma. It was trickle-down education, because why let a good chance for create debt slaves go to waste? When I was in school, we were told the truth. We had 5 options for the future: join the military and get ready for Iraq, accept college debt and gamble on the future, sell meth, be homeless, suicide. But hey, us choosing to be born non-rich. Better luck next cycle. Teachers protested, but the state government's response was get back to work or get a real job, commie. Public schools have gotten so bad that teachers have a saying: kids don't drop out of high school. They drop out of 2nd grade and hang around for 10 years. Now across the US, we have conservative parent groups demanding a say on what the public school teaches, which amounts to censoring history, science, and bringing religion into schools. We have special needs kids in regular classes with a ratio of 30 kids to a teacher, if they have a teacher at all. Some districts are so desperate they're hiring permanent substitutes. Our science teacher did not believe in human evolution. I grew up in Florida. The high school I attended was so bad that in the 1980s it was going to be shut down because the test scores were just so abysmally low. So in order to keep the school open, what they did was introduce the IB program, which is the program I did. This basically gathered nerds from the entire region into this one small program because your school district didn't apply if you went to IB, and the test scores from those kids would average into the rest of the school, making the test scores higher. It was really crazy going to that school because I felt that the education I and my friends were getting was really great, especially for a public school. Many of us were earning college credits starting in freshman year through AP or IB classes, and most of us graduated high school with the majority of GE already finished, roughly 1 to 2 years of university. We had really great teachers and the curriculum was pretty intense. IB is international, and so any IB student will tell you that it wasn't just our school. But on the flip side, I occasionally had regular classes that were not part of the IB curriculum, and man, those kids weren't learning. It seemed like all the money the school was getting by staying open was funneled straight into athletics. Some of those kids playing varsity football were reading at like a 3rd grade level, if that. A lot of those classes were really just glorified babysitting sessions. Not that there weren't any good teachers, there were some, but they just got no support from the administration. So you had kids graduating and going to MIT, not me lol. I was average at best among peers, while others were still graduating somehow and could barely read. I'm sure you'll find the same everywhere. The thing that's different here is anti-intellectualism. Communities which have a disdain for education in general and who look down on those who are educated and who will encourage their kids to not actually believe what they're being taught. The most important predictor of school success is parental attitudes towards education, which is why test scores typically follow household incomes except with certain first-generation neighborhoods. The US school system has standards and requirements that are far more well-rounded than most of the world. Canada is similar. The US system, although different for each state, educates everyone for at least 13 years, longer if you have disabilities, and requires a diverse college prep education for everyone, aside from some special education students. This is different than countries such as China and the Netherlands and the UK, where all students don't maintain a broad academic schooling. In the UK, even the brightest students have pared their school subjects down in their last years of high school. In the Netherlands and many other European countries, I just picked the Netherlands generically, students are tracked into non-academic schooling as early as age 12 based on testing. In China, about half of students in the country, so bigger percentages in the cities, aren't allowed to go to high school and are essentially pushed into being factory workers. I don't know if any other country educates the disabled as we do in the US. Our system isn't perfect, and it certainly needs a lot of help, but much of the complaints about our education system are political complaints. Even Americans who never leave their city can't comprehend just how consistent and ever-reaching our far-right media really is. There are multiple radio stations blasting hate everywhere you go in America, every minute, every hour. Then billboards and other signs. Political ads all over YouTube and any other video sharing sites with pre-roll and mid-roll ads. Multiple cable news channels. If you have local broadcast, they're on that too. Signs all over businesses and homes. Homemade signs lining driveways and roads and easements. Bumper stickers on cars, even police cars, on their guns, and they love hoarding their guns. There are vast swaths of rural or semi-rural America where you literally can't turn your head without some piece of propaganda on some object. There is no limit to how much conservatives will invest in making sure they're fully inundated with hateful rhetoric every possible second of the day. Entrée means main course. In the 19th century, when French terms entered the US, the word entrée meant the meal between fish and roast. This usually composed of a lighter meat like lobster or chicken. When America entered the 20th century, they cut out the heartier meals like roast and made lighter meats the focus of the meal. The word entrée carried on to mean the focus of a meal to this day. In Europe, entrée kept its origin of being the beginning of the real meal. America kept the word's place in a meal, while Europe kept the word's actual French meaning. Americans love French fries, cheese, and gravy, but poutine never took off south of the border. Always found that odd. I'm an immigrant and fries are great, but poutine is just weird to me. The fries get soggy from the gravy, the cheese curds are texturally jarring, and there's no good way to eat it. Utensils for soggy fries? It feels like something someone came up with when they wanted cheesy mashed potatoes but was too lazy to make it and had frozen fries in the fridge. I don't get why people like it as much as they do. Americans have a near obsession with crispiness when it comes to fried foods, and poutine is the antithesis to that. I go to the corner store regularly, and they added a tip option a few months ago. They hired a new person there after they got tips, and she would keep the debit machine under the counter and then pass it up. I only realized after leaving the store the tip option wasn't on the machine, and the regular things I buy cost like $3 more than usually. The next day she was there again. I paid attention and called her out. She said that the machine with the tip option was broken, but she was handing me the same machine that usually has the top option. I left my stuff on the counter and started walking out, and she chased after me and said she would give me a receipt. Again, no tip option, but the price lowered, so I knew what she was doing. My brother's girlfriend also works there, so I brought it up with her and she told the manager. They looked into it and she had been doing it to every single order over $50 so no one would notice. She was making like $250 a night scamming people. Canadian here. I was just thinking the other day about how weird it is that America has a drinking age of 21. Here in Canada, the drinking age is 18 or 19. This means, in high school, we all drink underage and illegally, but we get through that phase before we go into the adult world. Whereas, in America, their rebellious phase is during college and university or when they enter the workforce. Or they start even earlier, also in high school, and it goes on for longer. Either way, this means that not only people are treated like adults and children at the same time, but they also aren't taught healthy coping or how to navigate alcohol and peer pressure properly. And then the same people who think a drinking age of 21 is a good thing also think weed is a gateway drug, when really, it's alcohol. What the America? Well, this has enough replies no one will ever see my comment, but no one has explained the reason why dentistry, internal medicine, and surgery all developed somewhat separately from each other, as well as other things that we're less inclined to accept as scientifically valid, like chiropractic and homeopathy. Doctors professionalized first. Ultimately, surgery proved to be so important and useful that surgeons became seen as equals. Dentistry hasn't been pulled into the same degree yet, but it's really time. Your teeth are important, especially when you live longer, and can really impact your health. And also, I've heard that dentistry is a little shaky on being evidence-backed. Hey, thanks for working for us for 10 years. Here's 10 cents of extra pay. I recently found out someone I am in charge of was making more than me with less qualifications than me. So, I recently led a strike. I'm an automotive technician, and it was more of a we went to a long lunch all at the same time than an actual strike. It worked though. Hopefully they learn from their mistakes. For my 10-year anniversary, I got to spin the prize wheel. I won a $25 car wash gift card. I ride a bicycle. Worked for 7 years at a previous job thinking that I would get paid more for being a hard worker. I held into the belief that I've grown up hearing, which was that hard work will pay off. Instead, all I got was extra work, extra stress, extremely burned out, and no extra pay. During COVID, they laid off other members in our team. They expected just 2 people to do the work of several employees, and I was the one that did 90% of the work because I knew the ropes and the other guy didn't. The cherry on top was that they put up a job offering for our team $20,000 higher than what I made. I was livid. By that time, I was too burned out to want to remain in this role, and I eventually quit. I guess I learned the hard way that hard work doesn't always get rewarded, and if I want a raise, I have to apply elsewhere. Tipping being for some reason seen as mandatory, to the extent that people say if you can't afford to tip 10% or more, then you shouldn't even go out. People assuming for some reason that I'm American? No idea why I would be writing this comment if I was American. I'm not, and that's why your culture that expects customers to pay waiters instead of the restaurants paying them properly is utterly insane to me. Learned from this comment that in much of America, servers do not get the minimum wage and literally rely on tips to afford food and housing. This is news to me, and I'll be a lot more considerate of American servers now that I know. I had assumed that it was like most countries, where the waiters are paid a standard wage and get tips as a bonus, which is why I felt that it was entitled to expect a large tip from every customer. So my new answer to the original question is I can't comprehend how American servers are paid well under minimum wage and it's treated as normal. The voting system we use makes it virtually impossible for a third option to do well. Then even if a third option did well, you eventually revert back to two parties. Let's use candy as an example. Say you have people deciding between Starbursts and M&Ms. That's how it's been. You have chewy fruity candy versus crisp candy-coated chocolate. And vote to vote, it seems to flip back and forth between the two. There is a section of voters that feel very strongly about chocolate or no chocolate, but enough in between that the winner changes. One day someone says, "Hey, I like the shape of M&Ms but prefer fruity candy, so let's have Skittles instead." This is a novel new idea, and you get a bunch of the Starburst voters and some of the M&M voters to peel off, and they manage to win. Now it's time to vote again. The voters that really want chocolate are never going to change from M&Ms, but the voters that definitely don't want chocolate have a problem here. Maybe they really prefer Starbursts. But last vote Skittles won and Starburst didn't do so well. If they vote Starbursts this time and some of the Skittle voters from last time switch back to M&Ms, they might be stuck with chocolate. So ultimately it's in their interest to vote for the most likely candy to win, that they are okay with instead of the one they actually prefer. In a way, they are voting against M&Ms more than they are voting for anything else. The widespread prevalence of completely unnecessary non-medical circumcision in infants. Is it something to do with the country's Puritan origins? Were they trying to prevent masturbating or what? I don't get it. We've had several periods of religious revival, and following the third one is when circumcision started to gain popularity. I suspect that social climate informed medical professionals of the day, because there was a notion going around amongst them that masturbation caused a number of diseases and conditions. From that, you get folks like John Harvey Kellogg, who advocated strongly for anything they thought would reduce masturbation, including circumcision. Kellogg specifically also invented corn flakes, based on the idea that bland food reduced Yule urges. He was also really big on enemas. The fact that a large segment of the population has been conditioned by media and politicians to support policies that are clearly not in their best interest. I mean, this is not China. You don't get disappeared for speaking up about bad government. So why they keep championing policies that the rest of the first world considers abhorrent is beyond me. And the worst part is those policies are not even internally consistent. Strike down Roe v. Wade because they're supposedly pro-life, yet those states who quickly moved to ban abortions are also those states that reject maternity leave or any policies that actually incentivize child rearing. This is my biggest beef with American politics, the sheer hypocrisy. My dad is polar opposite from me politically, so I can speak on how he justifies this sum. He's super religious now too, and he still does some mental gymnastics to make it all work in his head. Basically, he argues that caring about other people in the form of something like welfare is actually a net negative for the good people like himself and the select few he chooses to care about. He thinks the people getting welfare are bad people who are trying to cheat the system. He also thinks if you give them free stuff, you're just teaching them to milk the system and taking away any incentive they may have to get a job. In his mind, they are just lazy and could walk into any business, get a job, and have a normal life in a few weeks. He probably wouldn't say that if you pressed him on it, but that's kind of the assumption required for his worldview. Anyway, just to say that I think a lot of these people like my dad create a pretty complicated mental puzzle to let themselves think they are still decent. Good people who care about other people while also supporting policies that actually screw over the people who need help the most. I have double nationality, American and French. I also grew up in Latin America. What gets me is how much better everything works here. Voting is done on a Sunday when no one is supposed to be working. It's done by paper ballot and you have the results the same goddamn day. Healthcare? Even with zero insurance, my mom got her insulin for 1/10 of the price that she got it in Latin America, not even the actual us. Working hours are reasonable, we have guaranteed tow. We also have guaranteed paid maternity and paternity leave. I mean, sure, we get taxed pretty hard, but like I'd rather that than lose my home because I got in a car accident. Anyway, what I don't understand is how so many Americans keep voting against their own rights and for the rich to get richer. It's wild to me. Two-party political system that makes both halves of the country hate the other, including the weird religious tie-in. Like you are basically expected to be right-leaning if you are Christian. I get it for some things, like certain Christians being anti-abortion. and thus resonating with the political right in that area. Not saying I agree or disagree, but I can comprehend how it is tied to someone's faith. But it becomes pretty ridiculous when you think about other policies. If you are Christian, you must automatically be against public health care and pro-gun, even though neither of those things have any basis in religion. You really need more voting options so that there is less of an us versus them system, and there is more flexibility beyond to choices that oppose each other on basically all opinions. You basically have to either agree or disagree with 100% of what one of the parties says. Been here for just over a year. Y'all buy a lot of stuff. There are a lot of prepackaged things that people buy that seems to the soul out of everything. On Halloween, everyone had put up Halloween decorations that were bought from a store. Looked and felt completely soulless. Kids running around dressed in outfits they pulled out of a package. The entertainment seems prepackaged. The news feels prepackaged. Fun feels prepackaged. It sometimes feels like corporations are the real organisms and we humans are just a part of their machine. I never felt like this until I got to the us. What all those angsty American authors were talking about, things like Fight Club, etc., really resonated with me in the context of actually living in America. I have found ways to feel more human, found some community and some beautiful people. But some of the Americans I meet are so into buying their life and identity off of Amazon and Netflix that they look like zombies, and it's creepy as hell. How are there not any checks and balances for removing politician scumbags who lie like George Santos did when he got elected, and for lawyers like Jenna Ellis who lied that they had proof of a stolen election and had nothing? Like, how do people who scream about their inconstitution all the time allow this lying and outright criminal activity to tarnish their precious rights? Let's forget 45 for a second though. Santos lied about everything on his resume, from education to work experience, etc., and yet he can't be removed? That is so messed up. Think comprehending why anyone thinks America has any kind of set culture that can be applied to more than a tiny fraction of the population is what I find most difficult. American culture is literally a melting pot of all the culture in the world. Real patriot American culture only comprises like 20-25 of the actual population, for example. Every state is wildly different. Different amounts of different types of foreign culture is blended in everywhere. In Salem, Oregon, you will find a heavy Japanese-influenced culture due to a Tokyo University branch being located there, for example. There isn't a one-size-fits-all culture that can be applied to the U.S. As an American, something foreigners may not be aware of is the most common response when you tell your employer you're sick. They give you as few paid sick days as possible, which for many minimum wage jobs is 0. When you tell your employer you're sick and need to take the day off, most employers seem to assume that you're trying to have Ferris Bueller's Day Off, so many will try to encourage you to come in anyway, even if you would be handling food in food service. They don't seem to recognize that powering through your illness will make it last longer, so you end up losing more work overall. Not to mention the fact, I guess bosses don't believe in germ theory, since you'll get other employees sick who in turn will be less productive and get other employees sick as well as customers. My sister called in sick a couple days but couldn't get someone to cover her barista shift since their business is struggling to find employees. Her boss made some passive-aggressive comments and has started giving her as few shifts as possible, meaning it has been hard for her to afford rent and food, but thankfully she's been able to pick up shifts at other locations much further away so that she can survive. I reiterate that they are struggling to find employees to fill enough shifts company-wide, and this is how they treat her.